Okairi, welcome back to my channel, Made Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today I am back with my wonderful co-host PL with a new episode of Page Chewing. We are so delighted to fully be back in the flow of this show because one of our first guests back is none other than Victor Manibo. I had the pleasure of meeting Victor a couple years ago at Glasgow World Con. He was kind enough to agree to give us some of his time, and then I took forever following through on that. So I'm just so happy that we finally were able to put this together. But before we get started, we like to let our guests just give a little self-introduction. So if you could just tell the people watching what it is you do in the book space.
Hey, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm so glad we finally get to do this after, I think, a couple of years. And I honestly think that's so par for the course with publishing, which, where everything takes forever, right? But I'm glad we finally get to do this
Yeah.
after talking about it. I remember Glasgow fondly. It was such a great time. And now we're here. So for those who don't know me yet, hi, my name is Victor Manibo. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a speculative fiction author mostly, although I've also written some crime fiction. My last book is a gothic horror called The Villa Once Beloved, which came out from Erewhon Books in November 2025. And shortly before that, I came out with my first crime novel called Dead Note from Bonnier Books. It came out in May 2025. But I originally started in the science fiction space. I came out with The Sleepless in 2022 and Escape Velocity in 2024, both from Erewhon Books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have a very impressive catalog for just these few years. It's incredible. Like this, people always talk about Brandon Sanderson's speed. People need to be talking about your speed. It's amazing.
Thank you. I feel it in my body, in my soul. Sometimes it feels like, I'm doing too much, and it's exhilarating, and also it takes a lot.
Mm-mm. I imagine. I have so many questions about your writing process and the genres, and because that's another thing that's really impressive about your body of works is how many genres you've already hit and done well at, I must say.
Thank you.
So, but before we get into all the nitty gritty stuff, I do want to bring up a comment here from Crystal, who is just a phenomenal part of the book community. She was also in Glasgow, so those memories live on. So actually, Glasgow is a great place to start because we happened to meet while traveling, granted for book things at the time. But you also have gone traveling recently to all throughout Asia. So I just wanted to start by talking, just a little more of a casual conversation about how were your travels? Where'd you go? How was it?
Yeah. So, and again, I think like part of the delay in us getting together was me just being gone. I was in Asia for like about a month in January, purely because I needed a break. As you were saying earlier, I came out with several books in a short amount of time, and I needed space and I needed inspiration. I also needed to go back to the Philippines. So that's part of my journey, was going back to my homeland and seeing some friends and family, extended family that I haven't seen in a long time. So that was really energizing for me, especially coming off of the heels of The Villa Once Beloved, which is all set in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
Not to get too, deep about it, but as an
Go on.
artist, it did feel a little bit like I was not. I felt like I needed to go back to the Philippines, just to honor how much it has given me in terms of the art that I'm producing. And a part of me was also feeling a little bit guilty that I haven't been back in such a long time. The last time I went back home was 2019, I want to say. So it was kind of, I missed it, number one, and number two, I produced all these stories about the Philippines and Filipino people. I need to go back and just say, hey, motherland, look at what I've done. I hope I've made you proud. So I spent a lot of time in the Philippines. That was great.
Mm-hmm.
And I also went to Japan. which was my first time, and it was also very inspiring, very illuminating. So yeah, those were my travels.
Mm. Well, PL was smiling because he knows, Japan is a connection for me. I lived there for 10 years. I just recently
Oh,
moved.
did you?
Yeah, my husband's Japanese, so I married in.
Oh, oh, awesome. Where in Japan did you live?
Fukuoka. It's
Okay.
yeah, the southernmost island of Kyushu. Well, not
Mhm.
southernmost, that would be Okinawa. But yeah, so it's funny because people will ask me, where should I go in Tokyo? And I'm like, your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, Tokyo was great. Tokyo was a fever dream for me because that was our first stop.
Uh,
And, it is a big city. I am in New York, so I thought, cities are cities. Like, how crazy could it possibly be? But when you're my age and also jet lagged, haven't gone on a long haul flight in years, and just getting into this city that's just a sensory overload in the best possible way, it was just like, whoa, I am tripping and I'm not even on any substances. This is amazing.
Sensory overload is such a perfect way to put that city. It's just, there's always something happening. It's never not active, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I loved it there.
Actually, before we move on, I'm curious because I know you're in New York, and that's the
Mhm.
city that never sleeps. Did you feel there were similar vibes in Tokyo? Did you feel like there was because they're both such active cities, but in different ways,
Oh
right?
yeah, absolutely. Especially when I was writing The Sleepless, right?
Yeah.
The Sleepless, for those who don't know, is the main premise is the world, or at least part of the population of the world, doesn't require sleep and doesn't have the ability to sleep. And a lot of the premise comes from the fact that I live in New York. I've lived in this city for 18 years now, and I love it. Um, but I always thought of Tokyo as kind of like a touchstone, not just aesthetically, because it's a cyberpunk novel, and a lot of cyberpunk draws from imagery and aesthetics from 1980s, specifically 1980s Japan, right?
Mm.
Um, but also just the way of life in Tokyo, from what I understood it, not having been there, but consuming a lot of media and knowing stories and knowing people who are from Tokyo,
Mm.
I thought, you know what? It, Tokyo is a sleepless city as well. I toyed with the idea
Mm.
very early on with Sleepless. Is like maybe part of the story takes place in Tokyo, and
Mm.
the way that Sleepless unfolds, it starts out in New York, but there are other locales that our protagonists go to, and I thought like maybe I could go to Tokyo, but then because Japan in general and Tokyo specifically is such a large looming presence in the cyberpunk space, I feel like, oh, this should be a whole other story altogether. This could be a
Mm.
completely different novel of its own.
Mm. Mm.
But
Mm.
yeah, that I just felt like such a kinship to that place, especially while working on The Sleepless and being able to see it years after, and just having the time of my life was really kind of soul nourishing.
Oh, that just makes my heart so happy to hear you had that
Mm.
kind of experience there. It's interesting that you mentioned the sleepless because that was a connection that I wanted to make is the idea that environment is so important for how where you choose to tell a story. And I heard you say in previous interviews that you chose New York because you know it so well. It's a part of you, right? So you're able to write about other elements of it that maybe others wouldn't be able to if they didn't live there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And because it was the very first novel that I took seriously in terms of writing, and the first novel that I finished,
Yeah.
it was kind of natural almost to just take from where I am and the environment that I'm at, and that made the job a lot easier. They say, write what you know. That's one of the first nuggets of wisdom that a writer receives from the community. And so I did write what I knew, which was, New York City, specifically Queens, New York, where my protagonist lives and where I used to, well, I still live in Queens, but the specific neighborhood was the neighborhood that I put in the novel where I was living. So when I'm talking about the elevated train tracks, when I'm talking about Jamie running around this neighborhood, it was the neighborhood that I knew. And it was kind of doing it on easy mode at that time because I was new and I thought, oh, this is just, I'm just playing around with these characters and these ideas. Maybe I just, put it where I am right now, and that'll make things easier for me to write the other things, right? The things that I really need to make up, which
Right.
is this bigger world, a world where people don't sleep.
Right.
The world of 1940, 2040, 2043 and onwards, right?
Mhm.
I can allot my creative brain space building those details and not use it to, visualize a city, and just use a city that not only did I know well, but a city that a lot of readers know already. It gives someone like instant immersion just because New York, again, is one of those cities that just has such a looming presence in media, in literature, in like kind of cyberpunk stories, because they're always set in cities. And when we think of cities, we think of New York.
Right. Right. Mm-mm-mm. I saw PL nodding a lot. He's also an author, if you're not aware. So I saw him
Yeah.
resonating with what you were saying there.
And the thing is, like, I always think about authors who write fantasy, epic fantasy specifically, and I'm like, I could never build a city from scratch. I'm just gonna take from what I know, and what I know is my neighborhood, the city that I've lived in. With the Villa Once Beloved, I took from the hometown that my mother grew up in and where I spent summers in.
Mm,
Escape Velocity is a little different because it was in like one enclosed space in space. So I didn't have to take from like real life experiences and execute the space and place that I knew,
mm, mm, mm.
as much as I had to with the other novels. But again, when I'm thinking about epic fantasy or even like historical fiction, rebuilding a past place
Mhm.
from research, that hats off to writers who are able to do that and do that regularly.
Well, I don't know. The saying goes that the best fiction has nuggets of truth, right? So I don't think it's necessarily easy road for you to write using things that you know well, because it seeps into the story. In the Villa Once Beloved, as someone who's never been to the Philippines, I was able to taste and touch and sense the environment because you're working with what you know. So I don't think that self-depreciating is fine, but I don't think that,
No,
that it's a negative thing to work with that personally.
yeah, no, I think, yeah, a part of it is like self-deprecation, but also part of it is knowing my skill set. I think with
Right.
a sense of, having done this, I'm still fairly new to this. I started writing in 2018, 2017, and I
Mm,
get a sense of, okay, what am I really good at? What are my strengths? And when people say, oh, this is really immersive, you got a really strong sense of place, I really have to thank, my past selves and the past places that I've been to. Again, harkening back to what I was saying earlier about honoring my homeland by actually going there, right? I
mm,
think the sense of place owes a lot to my personal experience, like you were saying, but to
mm,
create it from whole cloth, I know that that's a strength that I still need to build up. You mentioned earlier how I've done several genres. I do want to write fantasy at some point, and I have like all these ideas, and I just know, okay, I'm gonna have to do a lot of experimenting, training, research to be able to build these kind of kingdoms and empires that I know I want to execute. Maybe 2, 3 books from now.
Well, I'm excited to get fantasy from you, that's for sure. But if you want to talk about world building, I'm going to hand it to PL here, because this man is the most world building planning person I have ever met. 7-book series,
Yeah,
all planned. So it's interesting to hear writers and what they find challenging, what each writer finds challenging.
yeah,
Um, on that note, I do have also an author, and she's My feelings about writing contemporary, as in real cities in our world, is exactly the same as your feelings toward making stuff up. Writing a city that people know is way more intimidating. So she is the
It
opposite.
it was intimidating for me writing about, for example, New York of the Sleepless in 2043. I think is where I said it, or where it starts,
Mm.
and that's because I just knew that like there will be people out there, there will be New Yorkers out there who'd be like, this is actually not how things work. This is actually not accurate. And you know, at
Exactly.
the time, yeah, at the time I was again this baby writer who's trying out something new. So there were a lot of voices in my head that I thought, oh, the readership is going to think this or assume this, or the readership isn't going to be forgiving about certain stylistic choices, certain details. But as I've progressed, I've learned that readers just want a good story. They're not really looking for verisimilitude every time.
Hmm.
And yet, to balance that out, I also mostly write for my friends and family. When I write something, even now, I think, oh, my husband is gonna love this bit, or like, oh, this is gonna gag my sister if I put this place in. And I just know that they would also be like, well, actually, this is not how this town looks like. This is not my mom's or our mom's hometown. This is like a little different. So there are these competing like ideas of like the readership in general. As long as you execute it well, you don't have to get every detail right. At the same time, there are very specific readers out there that I'm going to be like, I'm going to hear from them and I'm going to have to defend myself.
Well, the subjectivity of reading is something that we talk about all the time, right? So even if you make up everything, there's going to
Yeah.
be someone who says, "Well, actually," you know. So I think
Yeah.
the subjectivity of reading is both a blessing and a curse. I think when you talk about it in that kind of context,
Yeah.
you know.
And I just think about, am I giving the reader the best experience possible that I can do, and there's just no way to hit all the marks with every reader. That's just an impossible task.
Right? And I imagine it's also extra difficult when you are taking on the challenges that you are, which is cultural cross sections and identity of the diaspora, right? There's a lot of gray area there. As someone who has married into another culture, my daughter, a lot of what you talked about in The Villa Once Beloved really hit hard for me because I think it's a natural part of being a part of two cultures that you are not fully a part of one, right? And it provides, not provides, but it creates a liminal space where you have no choice but to exist there,
Yeah.
right? So you're really tackling this liminal space in a lot of your books. And I just wanted to say that that's something that really comes through on the page. Is this something that you wanted to tackle, like objectively? You said, okay, this is something I want to talk about, or is it just your personal experience kind of coming into the story you want to tell?
Well, that is a really interesting question in terms of like connecting it to what I was just talking about in terms of like which details do I want to get right. When I was writing The Villa Once Beloved, this is really what I wanted to get right. This experience of someone kind of coming in from two cultures, being part of, for those who don't know, most of The Villa Once Beloved is centered on Sophie, who is a Filipino American. She was adopted, she was orphaned and adopted by an American couple. She grew up in Nebraska her entire life, has never been to the Philippines, but her biological parents are both Filipino, and so she's in this space of like, America's the only home that I've ever known. And yet, when I look at myself, I know that I am not fully of this place.
Mm.
And how do I capture that feeling? and how do I capture that experience. I'm a Filipino who lives in America now, but I grew up in the Philippines for most of my life. I moved to New York when I was in my 20s. So I did have the Filipino upbringing, and I still call it home. And now I'm writing a character of a different experience as me. And I wanted to get it right. And I wanted to get it right because I think it's important to, again, situate like my characters in these kind of um, scary situations because it's a gothic horror, right? And have them react true to who they are, who what their identities are, right? In this gothic horror, we deal with, without spoiling anything, we deal with the history of the place of the Philippines, or this particular place, this particular family in the Philippines. And so when dealing with history, when dealing with the history of a place or a culture, someone who is an outsider to that will react differently. Like someone who is a complete outsider, who is not Filipino at all, will react differently to the horrors of that place as would someone who lives there, who grew up there, as would someone who kind of has a tenuous connection to that place, is kind of only familiar, but not really, but also might want to be more familiar and want to feel more of a sense of connection to that place, just like Sophie. And so in terms of making that my objective, it definitely was. I definitely wanted to make sure, okay, if we're talking about the horrors of a particular place and time, we need to look at it from the lens of different people, because different people will react to it differently. And I want all those viewpoints represented fairly and as, as truthful as I could portray them.
That is such a deep and phenomenally interesting answer, because things that came up for me just while you're talking were things like when I was living in Japan, there are these green phones were there from before people had cell phones. And one night I was near one with friends, and everyone gave it a wide berth. And I was wondering what is going on here. And there is folklore about a woman who will approach you if you're alone in one of those booths specifically. And I had no awareness of that I should be scared, right? So you are speaking about a very true situation that I think if you get immersed in a culture that you didn't grow up in, or have, like you said, a tenuous relationship with, it's a very different experience. So hearing you make those comments, I'm rethinking about some of the reactions from the Villa Once Beloved. And that's just so cool. And a really good way to talk about the history too.
Yeah, thank you, first of all. And, it's interesting because you were saying, like, from the point of view of someone who wasn't familiar with the folklore, right? You're reacting in a specific way. And those can be getting to the nitty gritty of like craft and horror. Those can be used to great effect. Like, obviously, this person doesn't know the folklore, so they will be blindsided. They will be surprised. And then that's a good opportunity to, like, kind of introduce whatever the literary equivalent is of a jump scare, because you're viewing it from a point of view of a character who knows absolutely nothing. But then there are parts, for example, in The Villa Once Beloved, where the horror can be more of a creeping dread because a character knows, because a character is familiar. Like, oh, this character knows the history, knows that, like, this person died, or this person might come back, or this monster is a thing that exists. And now there is a sense that if you view this story from the lens of this person, then there's just this thing looming and kind of hanging over you for the rest of the book. And then you're wondering, when is the shoe going to drop? When is this person going to come back? When is this monster going to arrive? And those are two different feelings that you get from horror, right? The shock of the unknown, and then the dread of the known that's about to come. And those are, hopefully, if someone's doing horror right, this can be used to full effect in different parts of the story, because you can't just have jump scares all the time, and you can't just have a tension all the time, a sort of tension that never gets released. You can't just have creeping dread all the time. The shoe has to drop at some point. So yeah, I think that's why it was really important for me as well, specifically with this book, to have characters who had different experiences, had different viewpoints by which to view the space and the history from which these horrors would come from.
That's so cool. That must be so fun as an author to play with that. I know PL likes doing red herrings, right? So I feel like that would be a lot of fun for an author to just be able to play with, both. You get to have both of those elements within the story, but it makes sense within the structure and the context of the story. So you're not forcing anything. You get to play with both. That sounds, I have so much, my brain's just going through things I read from the book now. And I'm like, oh, it's been really fun for you to do.
Yeah, and that's the feeling that I kind of want to get from writing any project, really, is when I read something, I love when things click together. But also as a writer, that happens too. It happens when it's like, oh, you know what? If I do this, this harkens back to this bit. And because this character is this way, then I can execute it in this manner. And I know I'm saying it in a very like abstract way, but that's how I would describe the feeling of things clicking into place. And I hope that, if I'm doing my job right, I am able to impart that feeling so that the reader, like you were saying, also gets like, oh, now I see how that happened.
Something else before we move on from the idea of cultures clashing and this liminal space where they live, outside of just individually, people will react differently. On a larger cultural level, from my perspective, something else I got from your writing in The Once Beloved was the idea of collectivist cultures clashing with the individualism of the West, right? So, not to always reference Japan, but it is a big reference point in my life, right? So just to use it once more, Japan is very slow at being open to other cultural influences. I am very lucky in the microcosm of my family. They're very understanding, but I know many other situations that are not so accepting. And that is something also that I felt you were tackling in the book, is that kind of how in the West we're less bothered by losing a collective identity than they may be in certain Eastern cultures, Japan, and from my understanding, the Philippines as well. So that overall kind of cultural take as well, is that something that, I guess, was I picking up on the right thing in the book there? Or is it just you?
It's definitely part of it, because I wanted this Gothic novel takes place in an ancestral home, and it's centered around this family, the Sepulveda family. And I definitely wanted this family to have, number one, not just only a long history, because you want that in a Gothic, right? You want deep lore, right? But also you want it to be the kind of lore that wants to withstand test of time, wants to be as traditional as possible. And so the sense of, rejecting change, the sense of rejecting other cultures, the sense of, on some level, rejecting Sophie, because she is, and these are lines in the book, she looks like she should be part of this, but she isn't. She's not. She's, really a farm girl from Nebraska at heart. And, this is one of her kind of conflicts, internal conflicts. And so I did want to show traditionalism and how that is part of this family specific kind of damage. But also, when you're dealing with characters, sometimes they're representative of larger things that you want to say about a people or a culture. And definitely the Sepulvedas as a family unit, I was trying to say something about my culture and my Filipino, my understanding of how Filipino values are, right? And again, this is just my view and this is just my viewpoint. I wanted all of that represented in how the Sepulvedas acted and how they kind of viewed outsiders, and how, at what point would they welcome outsiders. There's a scene or several scenes pretty early on in the book where the family's having dinner with Sophie, and the issue of class comes up, or the issue of ability comes up. Like, oh, you're so smart, you go to Stanford, tell us about your small town, etc. Again, that's part of what I want, is part of something that I wanted to say about my Filipino culture and my understanding of it, and how class always pervades a lot of the conversations into about acceptance, about what's allowed, about how are you able to be a part of this family, be a part of this culture, be a part of this collective, and the factors that kind of are okay and not okay to gain that acceptance.
I saw that really resonating with PL, so I wanted to pass it off to him. I've been hogging your time, so let me go
And
get a word in edgewise, I think. But that what you just explained speaks to so many concrete examples in my personal life. So I think that a lot of people are going to resonate with the fact that, like I said, you're dealing with those thorny topics. You're taking them head on. So
yeah,
it's a good thing, I think.
Yeah, I know I'm curious, Victor, because you chose to write not just a Gothic horror, you chose to write a Filipino Gothic horror. So everything is rooted in culture, and I know you're straddling cultures with Western American, Filipino. However, for most readers, Western readers, they're much more used to seeing Gothic horror set in these, Victorian era, mansions, and in Europe, but you're substituting that, not substituting. You're doing something very original, compared to what some people are used to, right? So you're setting it in the Philippines. So, when you think about Gothic horror, I mean, obviously I haven't read the book, but I'm sure that all the elements are there. Excuse me, you talked about some of them. So things like, because horror, I'm assuming there's the gloom, the isolated kind of settings, that you very much broached about the past coming in and clashing with the present, the intrusion of the past, supernatural things, this kind of, this feeling of like decay, these old institutions decaying. But why was it important for you to, especially since you do straddle both cultures, Western and non-Western, why did you choose to make it a Filipino Gothic horror as opposed to one set in more of a Western setting?
I think, when I approached this project, I wasn't really thinking I want to write a Filipino Gothic horror. And it was because I think subconsciously, I've always thought of a lot of Filipino stories or movies and books to be Gothic in themselves, even before I knew what the contours of Gothic was, right? Now we talk about Gothics, the three of us are talking about it in the context of people who are wide readers, who are writers, who have very specific ideas of what a Gothic should be. But when I was growing up and I was consuming stories from back home, there were crumbling mansions. There were ultra dramatic characters. You had witches and ghosts and crones, and you had curses and family lore that came back to bite you in the ass. You had all of these elements, all of these tropes and conventions that we attach to Gothic, that was already in the stories that I was consuming. So I wasn't like thinking I want to specifically make Filipino Gothic, right? When I conceptualized the story, I really wanted to talk about the recent or fairly recent historical horrors of the Marcos dictatorship, which occurred in the 60s to the 80s, and how it kind of has returned in some form because the former dictator's son became the current president of the Philippines. And I was thinking, okay, if I want to talk about that and I want to talk about how horrific that was, the best vessel and vehicle for that would be a Gothic horror novel. It's not something that I'm used to based on my previous books, which were sci-fi, but it didn't feel right to make it a sci-fi tale when I'm talking about the past, right? It could have been a historical fiction novel. I thought about that. And I thought that, like, well, it will be fun if there are monsters in this. It will be fun if there are ghosts in this. So instead of historical, I made it Gothic. But that was the thought process. It wasn't really like it would be cool if I could do, Rebecca, but set in my homeland. And so going from that original intention of talking about this very specific historical moment, which is tied to a particular country and particular places in my country, it just became natural that, like, okay, it will be set in a place where there are coconuts because that's kind of like part of the plot, right? And it will be set in a big crumbling mansion owned by a rich family because, again, class is a main issue that drove a lot of what happened during the Marcos dictatorship. Corruption is a big thing that happened during the Marcos dictatorship and kept happening and keeps happening. So it was just like, well, these elements, it almost like I couldn't help but write a Gothic horror set in the Philippines because I wanted to talk about these things that I wanted to talk about.
And I think as well, and you please correct me if I'm wrong, it definitely sounds like, in my view, and again, we're categorizing things, we're putting things in boxes where perhaps we should or I shouldn't, but you know, I know that as an author, much of my work is a reaction to me coping and dealing with things: racism, colonialism, misogyny, religious intolerance, homophobia, things like that. Ills that I see are huge societal ills. But as well, I would say that in a way, I feel like these things are very suitable to be dealt with in terms of cosmic horror, that these are existential threats and dreads. And I guess my question is, because it all obviously it sounds like, how could you not be, that the Marcos regime, which was, is a horrific oppressive regime with these violent crackdowns and, the terrorist acts against its own citizens. It sounds like definitely that was a reaction to that. But would you say also that in a way it is a cosmic horror element of this, and unfortunately we see this in current, certainly not just in the Philippines, but in many regimes, this reaction against this omnipotent and oppressive power that's pervasive and is lording over, people that can't be stopped?
Yeah, I think, my instinct and my initial impulse when I'm writing something is always to start with themes and start with like big ideas. So, with Sleepless, I was talking about capitalism and hustle culture and labor productivity. That's really all where it started. Escape Velocity is about wealth inequality and how that impacts, the way we view the environment. It's a lot about class. And so with The Villa Once Beloved, it was about fascism and toxic masculinity, and how, again, how that plays out. And these concepts, these are huge and pervasive and historical and all encompassing, and it affects everyone's lives. So when you say cosmic, it's like, that is exactly what it is, right? These are cosmic horrors, literalized. And I think for me, when I was writing The Villa Once Beloved, there were two directions that I um, could have taken with it, right? It could have gotten like, let's go macro and talk about this in a larger scale with like more cosmic horror, and not to, again, not to confine to like these characters where now we have like characters that represent certain things and certain ideas. And that was the other route, and that was the route that I took. And I think, there are advantages and disadvantages in viewing and telling stories in that way. For example, with The Villa, as much as I am happy with how it turned out, and I'm, confident in the choices that I make, I can still recognize some of the limitations in terms of like, oh, it would have been fun if I was able to do this. For example, there were parts of this that were supposed to be a lot longer, a lot bigger, and a lot more tied to backstory. I know it takes place in one space, but I wanted a parallel timeline story that was more about what was really going on, and politically and historically. And I couldn't do that. I had to like pull back a little bit, because I also had to make sure I was staying true to like most of what the architecture is, which is still, the Gothic. So it had to be a little bit more confined. And, thank God for good editors, because they're the ones who rein me in. And like a good editor will give you enough slack and rein you in when necessary. But yeah, to this idea of writing about these big ideas and this big issues, at least for me, and you probably can relate to this as well, sometimes it's so hard to not um to tackle that scope and not have that same scope in your work. I think, when you're doing a 7-book series, you probably have a lot more leeway, or you're given a lot more leeway than I am if I'm doing a standalone Gothic. But I think the kind of the craft requirement that's necessary for writers is still there. Like, how do you distill it? Do you distill it in terms of like putting an idea into one person or one situation? Do you create kind of a metaphor for one historical event and do it in one scene or one chapter? And those are creative choices that, someone has to make. And I think I made some of those choices to some extent in The Villa Once Beloved, but that's always like kind of the calculus when you're dealing with such big themes and ideas.
Yeah, and I want to get back to Taylor shortly after I ask this question, but listening to you talk and hearing this, because when I first started, frankly, doing my research on you, Victor, one thing that struck me was I was like, wow, I was just so impressed that this author he switches up genres as if, he has, as Taylor mentioned, he's so successful. Oh, you can write a Gothic horror, no problem, it's great. Write a science fiction, it's great. Write a thriller, it's fantastic and well received and has acclaim. And I think as a writer, you have a very unique skill set. Like, you're extremely talented and extremely diverse with talent. Like, I don't feel I can write and just. I don't think a lot of authors can write in all these genres and write them so well, which you do. And it's just really it's just so impressive. But I'm just wondering, is the reason why you switch up genres, does that have anything to do with what you talked about in terms of to convey certain themes, like some genres you believe are or subgenres or mixing genres is the way to convey some of the themes? Is that one of the reasons why perhaps you write in so many different genres and subgenres?
Right. I think you nailed it on the head. It's really what do I want to talk about, right? Like, what is the theme? And as I'm progressing in this career, I'm still fleshing out my identity and my style, and I'm learning that I seem to be a theme forward kind of writer where that's where things start. And that's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but that's where I am at this point in my life, in my writer life, right? And so that's how it happened with, I think, with all these books that I've had so far. I have these big topics and ideas and themes that I wanted to talk about, and then I had to find kind of the best genre vessel to tell those stories in. With The Sleepless, it was just like kind of a good fit to talk about rampant capitalism and its effect on our views of labor and human capital, and make it cyberpunk, because cyberpunk has always been doing that, right? Cyberpunk has always been um, talking about capitalism and corporatization, and the loss of the dehumanization of laborers and workers, right? With Escape Velocity, I kind of set it a little bit farther into the future, but it's about class and wealth inequality. And you know right when I was writing that novel, a lot of the conversations were around space tourism. And we've had a long tradition of science fiction stories about space exploration and space colonization. And there is something to be said, and a lot of writers have said it, about how space colonization has to be rethought of, or like we have to take a different point of view from it, different from how it's been thought of during the golden age of science fiction, where it's like this great thing, where it's part of a country's, or this country's, manifest destiny to conquer the stars, right? um, and so again, if I wanted to talk about wealth and expanding wealth and how the wealthy are treating this planet that we have, I think setting a story in space where the society is trying to venture out into further into space is the best genre vessel for that. And I've talked about the villa a lot already, but the same applies. I wanted to talk about this moment in time. I wanted to talk about dictators and toxic masculinity, and the Gothic is perfect for that. So the more I now think about next projects, or like, what do I want to pursue next, or what do I want to talk about next, what kind of story I want to talk about next, those two will have to marry. The theme will have to marry with the genre. Does it make it easier for me? No, because it feels like I have to learn new things, which obviously is great, which I love. But at the same time, I've also heard from other writers about how that can definitely set me back in terms of like leveling up my skills. It's kind of like you're multi-classing in D&D, right? Like, you can't be the most powerful wizard and also the most powerful fighter. So there are definitely trade-offs, and that those are just things that I've begun to kind of know and understand about my process. Is that like, I'm going to think about something that I feel passionately about, and then the genre will follow, the structure will follow, the characters and place will follow.
Mm-mm. Fascinating to hear that you kind of work backwards in that regard to other authors that I've talked to who tend to work the other way. The setting speaks to them, and then they go, okay, then what could be in this setting? So that's really interesting. But I just wanted to comment a little bit on the horror genre before we move on. Just the idea that horror has come such a long way, coming from the unknown in the Lovecraftian times being obviously horrendous racism, that is his unknown, to now that unknown, or that dread you were talking about, can be expanded to talk about so many different things. And I just wanted to say that I love that you are making that a priority, to do that in different genres, right? To expand what it is that we talk about when we talk about these cosmic horror elements or whatever. I think that's you're fighting the good fight there by doing that. But
Thank you.
But let's say you have now decided, okay, this is what I want to talk about. And now I have decided this genre is the perfect vessel for it. What's your next step then? Let's say your next story, the perfect vessel is epic fantasy, right? So how do you as an author sit down and say, okay, let me rewire for this, let me prepare myself for this, right? Is there a process that you go through?
Well, from there, I think it differs, or at least it's different for every book, right? So like I have this kind of like real like passionate thing that I want to talk about, and then it's like, okay, this is the kind of story that it's going to be. Then with Sleepless, I think it started out with the premise, the idea of like people not being able to sleep, right? Got the theme, got the genre, got this premise, the idea. With Escape Velocity, it was a little different. It's like I wanted to talk about wealth inequality. I wanted to, set it in like space, like near future, like 2080. And then what came next were the characters. I wanted to be, the messiest billionaires you can possibly find, and just set them all in like one high school reunion and see all the messiness unfold and see all the shenanigans ensue. And then like because it's a story about wealth inequality, you also get the service workers on that space station and put them all in one place in one enclosed space and see how that unfolds. So the characters came next. With the villa, it had to be the place. It had to be the house, right? The house came next. It's like, oh, it's got to be Gothic. Well, I got to have a house. I can't not have a house when you're doing a Gothic. It has to be a huge house. Has to be a crumbling manor. And, luckily, my country's culture and history just lends itself to that, because we do have these estates. We have these manors that were from the Spanish colonial period. So it's like, okay, easy, that's it. Now I'm going to build this house from in my mind, and visualize what that looks like, and situate it in a particular place, and then populate it with people, then populate it with a family, right? So that was kind of the sequence of things. With Dead Note, that note is a little different because that was a thriller and that was commissioned. So somebody, the publisher, approached me with a pitch, and I said, okay, that sounds great. I want to write about that particular moment in time in the Philippines, which was around 2000, 2001, when our country deposed our former president because of rampant corruption connected to illegal gambling. And the good thing about this project was, even though it was a commissioned project, they gave me a lot of creative leeway. They basically gave me a short pitch, and they were like, take it wherever you want to take it. I didn't have to give me a main character. It didn't have to give me like a sequence of events. And so it still felt really very collaborative, where my editor was like, just telling me an idea, and it's like it felt like I was just riffing with a writer friend. It's like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we write this? And I was like, you know what, that would be cool, and this is how I would do it. And then they were like, you know what, that sounds great, go for it. So with that, the theme kind of came from them. Let's talk about rampant corruption that was going on in the Philippines at that time, but set it, make it a thriller. And I was like, okay. But then I had to think about, well, what kind of thriller is it going to be, right? Because there are a lot of kinds of thrillers. Could have been a slasher. Could be a serial killer thriller. And the way I structured it is like, it's a cat and mouse dual point of view thriller, which I love reading as well. I love it when I flip the page and it's the other character's point of view, seeing the events from their point of view, and they're chasing each other. And I chose that because it was a battle of kind of, at least for that time and for that setting, a battle of like kind of competing interests in the people. Dead Note is set in, again, around 2001 in Manila. And at the time, there were the people, I would say, were really of two minds about how to go about this corrupt administration and how they viewed the presidency. The president that was deposed, Arab Estrada, was the most popular president the country has ever had. He won by a landslide. A lot of people believed in him, and a lot of people still believe in him, even though there was proof, kind of, for me, incontrovertible proof at the time of his corruption. And so these two characters, the two main characters, kind of represented the views of this president and this presidency and what was going on in the country. But also, I had to like boil that down to like, this person wants to kill and this person wants to survive, right? So that's the kind of genesis of that. So I would say, like, at least for the last 4 books, it's still been the same progression of like going from big idea, theme, big topic, that I feel strongly about, to the genre, to then from there it kind of diverges. It's like we could go start with a place, start with the characters, or start with like a really cool premise.
So it just kind of builds upon itself. Once you solidify one thing, it can help you solidify another. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think also at that point where I'm like, I've decided on a theme, I've decided on a genre, that's when I allow myself to have fun.
Yeah.
I think it's like, okay, what would be fun to write? And like going back to Escape Velocity is like, okay, well, I think it would be fun if it was just like a billionaire high school reunion in space and they, bad shit happens to them.
Yeah.
in different ways. I think that would be fun. So that's what I did.
Yeah. So as Crystal says here, because it'll be fun is the best reason to genre hop. Yes. And then we have another, yay, multi-classing. And I also didn't put this up earlier. I just wanted to say thanks for being here, Jared. You said hi earlier. So if you'll forgive me for pulling outside of fictional worlds here for a moment and bringing in your day job. So not only do you write in all genres and tackle all of these themes, you're also a lawyer. And the number of authors that write speculative fiction or fantasy that are lawyers is steadily increasing. Like there's a lot of you, Ken Liu, yourself, Gaurav Mohanty, just to name a few. And I'm just curious, do you think there's something to the job of being a lawyer that creates really good storytellers? Because you're all really good at what you do. Is there a connection there?
Thank you. No, I mean, there are a lot of lawyers turned writers or lawyer writers that I admire. Ken Liu, as you mentioned, Rebecca Roanhorse used to be in law as well. I think, and not even just in speculative fiction, but in fiction in general, right? Angie Kim, Courtney Milan used to clerk for a Supreme Court justice. And I think it's because as lawyers, especially if you're a litigator, you are a storyteller. You are presenting a side of a version of events in the best possible way to achieve the goals of your client. And that's what I do on a daily basis. I'm an immigration lawyer specifically. I litigate. I do removal defense, meaning I represent non-citizens in immigration court and try to convince an immigration judge not to put them on a plane. So I have to present a case to a judge. Yeah. And I have to like convince a judge over, this other side, the prosecutor, ICE attorneys who want to put my client on a plane. So I'm telling a story. They're also telling a story, and it has to be a compelling story. The main difference being, as a lawyer, it has to be a true story. It has to be truthful, and not only truthful but also factual, because those are two different things. But those skills, that kind of requirement in the day job to tell a compelling story, necessarily, at least for me, bleeds into my fiction work. I think, it helps me, both sides help the other. I I have gotten feedback from coworkers, from my boss, and from people who have just read my briefs and my motions that, oh, I don't know if I'm just influenced by the fact that I know you write books, but your writing is so much more compelling after you started writing novels. So the both sides help, I think, um, and that's because of the fact that yeah, this this is what we do. Um, the level of prose is different, obviously, and again, the requirement that you create things out of whole cloth from your imagination is different, obviously, but persuasion and a little bit of emotional manipulation. I'm not gonna lie, both tracks do emotional manipulation. Um, those are transferable skills.
Hey, at least you're putting it out there. I love that.
Yeah.
No, I think that's we all do that, even if we're not
Yeah.
lawyers. It's just a part of being human and storytelling, because you want someone to understand and empathize with what you're talking about, even if you're just
Right.
gossiping. My relationship with my best friend is, okay, who do we hate today? Convince me.
Yes.
It's just what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, like if they're really compelling, you don't even need to be convinced that much. It's like
Right.
you say one or two things. It's like, yes, I got you. I believe you. Let's hate on her today.
Exactly. I'm on.
Oh, so your girlfriends and my girlfriends are the same, is what I'm getting.
Well, that means that we have good taste in friendships. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, there you go.
But as someone who, as you mentioned there, recognizes that daily life, your work life does affect what you write about, and vice versa, and the themes kind of inform each other. Is there something that you do to kind of take care of yourself when you're writing about these kinds of themes? I know that PL has, deals with a lot of those themes as well. So I guess this question could go for you too, PL. But, when you're writing about something that is a reality that you have to face, but you're also trying to make it empathetic and understandable in a fiction world, delve into that thing. You can't be on surface level for it, right? So I'm just wondering, kind of, I guess this is not necessarily craft, but more behind the writing. Is there something that you do to make this something that's healthy for you to do? Something that you do to take care of yourself? Either of you? Go to both of you.
Yeah, I think for me, I've been lucky enough to be the kind of person who can compartmentalize. I know that like I can write a good scene and do solid character work without inhabiting the headspace of that character too much. There's I'm still able to maintain that distance. Now, I'm also aware, and I've also noticed that like maybe that kind of emotional distance, as much as it's good for me, is maybe hampering the storytelling a little bit. Like, sometimes, how sometimes like you feel like, oh, I could go further here. I could push this a little bit more. And sometimes I know, especially like in earlier works, I know that I pulled back a little bit. And I think part of that pulling back is an effect of me being able to or wanting to kind of distance myself. Like I'm thinking specifically, for example, of Sleepless. There are parts of Sleepless where I was talking about suicide, and our main character has someone really close to them, die of suicide. And at the time, I was also, unfortunately, it just so happened, I had to deal with the suicide of someone really close to me, right? And I didn't write the book because of that experience. I was already editing the book when that experience came in. But then as I was editing the book, I was thinking like this scene or this kind of plot point, this characterization, the interiority of Jamie dealing with his cousin's suicide. This could go further, this could go deeper. And I felt like I needed to hold back because I was going through something similar. And I'm able to do that, thankfully. And I just have to tell myself, like, okay, gotta walk away. We can't work on this right now. We gotta like take a couple weeks, um, and then come back to it, see how we feel, right? So I'm able to do that. I know that some writers, you know, they prefer to put it out all on the page and get it out, and then like, um, have the work, have the art kind of be therapeutic, whatever therapeutic means for them, right? That's not how I deal. I like these are going to be two things, and I'm going to deal with it separately. I'm going to deal with it in therapy. um, but yeah, that's mostly the compartmentalization is what has worked so far. I've realized how it might hamper some choices that I make. And that's a balance that I know I have to be aware of, and I'll have to strike that balance in different ways depending on what I'm writing about and what I'm feeling.
Mm-mm-mm. Well, first of all, I'm so sorry for your loss, truly. But from a reader's perspective, I feel that way even. And I'm not the one putting it on the page. There are certain books where I open it, there's a theme, and I'm like, oh, nope, not now. This is not going to hit right. So I imagine if you're actually delving into it and writing it, it would be a whole different animal.
Yeah.
But I did want to open that up to PL because PL, it looked like you had something to say there. I didn't want to talk over you.
Oh, no, not at all. No, thank you. And again, Victor, so sorry for your loss.
Thank
terrible. You. No, actually, Victor actually hit on the opposing strategy, or the opposing, way of method of coping. I kind of embrace it, and it's, if as Victor used the word therapeutic, we talked about writing in reaction to, as Taylor knows from me and my work, and having known me for so long, a lot of my work is in reaction to things. And, I don't, without getting too much into my line of my regular line of work instead of writing, there's definitely a correlation to what Victor has experienced in his work life, probably more of an off-camera discussion, but I always, my thought process has always been for, the things I write about, I think it's so intentional, because one of the reasons why I have this reaction in my writings, because I've always said, if you are, a woman dealing with misogyny, someone from the LGBTQIA plus community dealing with homophobia or transphobia, a racialized person dealing with racism, we don't get the opportunity to look away. We don't get the opportunity to duck, because it's what we live with, and that's our reality. And we never know when we're going to be, when we're going to experience that, right? Whether it's on a subtle or an overt, in your face level. And I've always presented my writing to the readers in that, hey, if you're going to read my book, be warned, you're not going to get to look away either, because that is the reality of our world. But that doesn't mean it's the right strategy. That just means what I do. I totally respect and appreciate Victor's strategy, that, and I also believe that, I think Victor's strategy in a lot of ways is probably healthier in terms of, especially for self-care. And I obviously it's an individual thing, but yeah, I totally agree and appreciate with Victor's strategy. Mine just happens to be that it's just perhaps the way I'm wired. So, but yes, I do. That was an exceptional point, Taylor, that you're raising. Yeah, I think there's different ways that writers perhaps cope with these things, and how they address them in terms of perhaps separating, writing from life, and or kind of combining it. So yeah, but it was an exceptional question. But yeah, that's my method.
Yeah, and to your point, like what really resonates with me too is like, as a writer, you and I as writers, like, we don't really want to look away from these, again, big important themes, like real things that happen in the real world, right? We don't avoid talking about them, but It's just a matter of like, okay, how do we talk about them without doing serious psychic damage to ourselves while we're doing it? I think, any step that requires, bravery and vulnerability, it's like the way writers and artists do, that will always kind of require a special amount of strength, and will require knowing how to like protect yourself. So again, the compartmentalization that I do, it's just something that's worked so far, right? Like this next project that I'm working on, for example, it's going to be horror, it's going to be sci-fi, it's going to be about relationships and marriage, and the collapse of civilization. And you're like thinking, and I'm thinking, like, how do you even write about this when literally everything is collapsing around you, right? And I think as I'm working on it right now, it's like this is getting harder and harder to like compartmentalize, because like I'm literally talking about like the everythingness of everything, and like there's no refuge. There might not be any more refuge. So we'll see how this current project goes.
The everythingness of everything. I'm putting that in my lexicon because that's just described. Just what's going on in your life nowadays. Just gesture. The everythingness of everything.
Yeah. Right? Yeah.
On the idea of not just protecting your mentality and protecting your own mental health, something that I think ties in really well with themes that you've worked with before is the idea of monetizing our free time or monetizing our hobbies, right? So the Sleepless, I think, tackles this, because suddenly if you don't have to sleep, well, I guess you do have the time, but would you use that time to do more non-monetized hobbies, right? As humans, what would we do with that? And I think that is a very particularly interesting topic in the space that we occupy, right? So here I am with books behind me, I've been reading my whole life, and yet I've chosen to make videos about it. I've chosen to monetize my free time and my hobby. Not that I make a decent amount of money. I'm not claiming that even a little bit. if anyone's watching this and wants to join BookTube, don't do it for the money. Okay, that's not what this is about. But it is something that all of us have chosen to do, right? So I think this could go with writing as well, right? You were a lawyer and then you decided, you know what? I'm going to write stuff too. So, and then you decided to publish the stuff you were writing, right? Yeah. At a certain point. So I'm just I guess there isn't a particular question there, but I would like to hear some of your thoughts on that concept, the idea of capitalism, us monetizing things we maybe shouldn't, what we do with our free time, all of that.
Yeah. That's so real. And that's something that I feel like, a few years into being a writer, when I wrote Sleepless, I did it late 2017 as a part of NaNoWriMo, rest in peace, I guess. But I did it because I just wanted to do it and see if I could do it. I've always toyed about the idea of writing, and I view it as a personal and like a personal challenge. Like let's see if I can do this. And then I did it, and I said, okay, now that I wrote this, what do I got to do? Oh, apparently you have to revise the thing. Okay, let's do that. And then next step is put it out there, try and get an agent, et cetera, right? And then I realized, like, oh my God, I just did what the story is saying. Like, maybe don't do that. Like, maybe like think about ways where like you're not always thinking about optimizing everything. You're not thinking about just like making money and hustling. And I recognize that I did have some privilege in the fact that when I wrote this, I wasn't really thinking about I'm going to make this a career, or I need to make this a career. And for a lot of people, that's not necessarily always a choice, right? Sometimes their art is also their livelihood. I'm not one of those people. but there are a lot of people who are. And I, from my limited and kind of different experience, that's tough. That's tough that you have to do this thing that you love, but also do it because you have to put a roof over your head and feed yourself and your family. And then like those kind of factors coming in affecting how you do what you love, because now it's not just doing what you love, it's also work. And it's also work that you don't get to control as much, because now you gotta produce something that will pay, that somebody else will buy. And it's not, and for some people like me it's a choice, and for some people it's not too clear of a choice. Like somebody will say like it's always a choice, but really when you're living in capitalism, and the more you look into it, the more you realize how few choices are really left to us as individuals. How that the choice of a job or a career isn't necessarily something that you have free reign or control over. And so this is something that I think about a lot, and that I'm always grateful for, that I get to write the stories that I want to write, and I have a team that believes in me, that still want to buy the books and the stories that I want to write without any financial precarity to me. So yeah, I wish that for everyone, and I wish that like we could all just do what we love without having to think about money. Unfortunately, we are not in the society that lets us do that. Part of the reason why I talk about these big things of like wealth inequality and capitalism and hustle culture and all that, and dictatorships, and they're all interconnected, right? They're all interconnected in that like these are all the things that are keeping the 99% of the world down. Part of the reason why I tell these stories is because like, hey, maybe like if I participate in this artistic conversation, things can change. Maybe if enough of us talk about this and it pervades us as a culture, as a people, pervades our values, maybe we can go towards things changing. But we're not there, and that's just like a vision that's always part of like what I see myself doing, what I hope my books can do.
Yeah, being part of the artistic conversation again, it's almost like you're a writer or something. You're good with words. That's a really good way to put that, I think, because it's, even as someone who doesn't make the art, the person who reads it and participates with it, interacts with it, and I guess in a way,
And you talk about it, and you evangelize about it, and you criticize it. You make things better. Like people who are into books, who produce videos, who produce reviews, who produce criticism, they make the writers do better. And they shine what we should be talking about and how we should be talking about them.
It's a symbiotic relationship. I agree. I think people forget that sometimes. People really forget that it's really a symbiotic relationship. We're better because each other exists, right? I mean, you can always blame social media, but it's social media. I'm telling you. I'm going to get on my boomer gripes soon if we don't get out of this conversation topic. But I do think the idea that art is, in some cases, must be monetized, but almost does its best when it's not, is a really interesting dichotomy. That I really like how you brought that up with the Sleepless, and just the idea of, well, as humans, if we could do this, without participating in the capitalist nature of art making, would we choose to anyway? Like, how far down the pipeline are we in that?
Yeah. And like, I might take this further, but this is going to be a completely like different topic altogether. But like, I was just talking about how, I envision my books and my words to hopefully have some effect on how we talk about things and the cultural conversation, hopefully the values of society and all that, right? But there is also something to be said about art not having a utilitarian purpose like that, art not needing to be a tool for change, art not needing to be a tool to open minds or educate, but art just being for its own sake. And there are tomes and treatises written about that. But that's also something I think about, like, at some point, hopefully I'm able to carve a space for myself where I can write a thing that is, number one, not intended for consumption, not intended for monetization, something that I'm not trying to sell, something that I'm not trying to put out there so that I can change minds necessarily, but just to connect to a reader, to just like, hey, I made this cool thing. I made this cool, beautiful thing that exists on its own, that is not meant to make you or me do anything. It's not meant to make money or anything, but it's just like, hopefully beautiful thing that I think is beautiful, that hopefully you will think is beautiful. There's also something to be said about that.
Well, I think we're coming full circle to the idea of connection, right? We talked about storytelling is how we connect to each other. It just is. I have a joke on the channel, my Lord and Savior, Ken Liu, because I love everything the man touches, but he also talks about that concept. People, we were lucky enough to interview him a couple times. And one of the times he had a quote that stuck with me that was, well, I don't want to misquote him, but here's the idea that he mentioned was, people ask, what's the point of the saga, that you're writing of the Dandelion Dynasty? He's like, it doesn't have one. Like, why do I have to give it one? I'm just giving this to you, and I think that really hits at the heart of why we do art anyway, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. That's just, I could go on that for a really long time.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about it for hours, because
really
I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about that.
Yeah.
Agreed. And probably the biggest issue I struggle with is that as an artist, it's never going to be enough to just perhaps make the art and do it and appreciate yourself. There's that connection piece, because you could write the most amazing novel and never publish it, and simply lock it away and read it as many times as you want and not share with anybody. And that doesn't mean it's not art, it's not relevant, it's not valuable, but it's not shared, right?
Yeah.
And when does it? But as artists, Taylor said it perfectly, and you were saying it as well, Victor, that it's about that connection, and that's why we do it. But it's almost because in the absence of that connection, I think for a lot of us, it doesn't feel fully realized. It's not alive until we share it. Even if everybody hates it, until we share it, it's not alive. So that just speaks to the connection piece that seems to be so critical for artists.
That also, we don't need to pursue this further, but I just wanted to say something that what you just said brought up for me just now, PL, is the pattern of appreciating art posthumously. Like, we love people's art after they're dead. That's just something that we do as a collective. That just popped into my head. I don't really have anything, in depth to say about it right now, but I think that would be worth thinking about as well. Why we
have Victor back so we can have a whole other conversation.
No, listen, this is another episode, okay?
Yeah, right. The ethics of art. That would be fun, actually. You know what?
Yeah, oh my God.
I'm down for that.
Go on for like 3 hours.
Yeah.
I know, right? And then another comment here that I thought was good. I've hit my everythingness quota for today, is going into my vocabulary.
That's the main thing.
Yes. But speaking of time, we are coming up on an hour and a half. It really does go so quick every time we do these.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes, you were saying, I got to buckle in, but we don't mean for it to go this long every time. We just talk to wonderful people. So I wanted to thank you for being so generous with your time. But before we kind of sign off, you had mentioned that you're working on a book now, another horror. So is there anything we should be looking out for you? Any epic fantasy in the pipeline?
Yes. So the next book is not going to be epic fantasy, but maybe the one after that. I am working on a novel coming out from Erewhon in a couple of years, and it's going to be sci-fi horror thriller. I've already posted it on the socials, even though I feel like it's premature, but you know what? I'm just excited about it, and my team is also excited about it. Um, Basically, the premise is this young gay widower finds his dead husband on OnlyFans and becomes obsessed with this kind of doppelganger
Oh,
on
sorry,
this
both of our
porn site.
faces, like, oh, tea, both of us.
and so that's the premise. For now, I have a working title of Doppelbanger, but I don't know if that'll come to pass. I hope it will, but we shall see. And in just like my other works, you I hopefully am able to provide a really cool premise and plot, but it's also speaking about larger things, right? And which I alluded to earlier about this one is going to be about just the breakdown of everything that's going on, the breakdown of reality, the ability of people's ability to trust their senses and know what's real or not, and misinformation, disinformation in this day and age. So it's going to be tackling a lot of, again, meaty themes and topics that I feel strongly about, that I'm giving a lot of thought to, encapsulated in this fun sci-fi thriller genre piece, psychological thriller piece. So
I'm sorry, I just saw Crystal's comment. I need it immediately. Yes. That is like the best elevator pitch ever. Consider me into it.
Thank you. I'm glad.
Sounds like another genre hop too, which I love that for you.
Yeah, this is, kind of back to sci-fi, but also it's going to be horror thrillery, and there's going to be a little bit of like domestic thriller elements to it, because at its core it's about this relationship and how toxic it can get, and not knowing who your partner is, or not fully understanding what your partner is doing, and all that juicy stuff that we get from domestic thrillers. So
Mm-hmm. Very excited for it. Well, thank you for letting us know that we have something exciting coming on.
Yeah.
So, we'll go ahead and do our usual sign-offs here. We will have all of Victor's links in the description down below. So if you want to go check out his website or his Goodreads or any of that, we got you. Read any of these wonderful books he's put out. But before we go, I always wanted to give a chance for my wonderful co-host to sign off before I close this out.
Just quickly, thanks. So just huge thank you to Victor. Just so awesome chatting with you. Thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time. This has been fabulous. I've learned so much from you. This has been really a wonderful chat. So quickly, PL Sturt, author and blogger, assistant editor before Go Blog, contributing member of Grim Magazine, author of the Drowned Kingdom Saga, 5 books out, 6 book, Black Dragon Red coming out soon in the spring, and finishing off the 7-book series sometime between now and early 2027. Website plsturt.com. Almost all the socials are at plsturt Writes. YouTube channel is the Drowned Kingdom Saga as well, where I do interviews, a different interview series called 6 Elemental Interviews. And of course, you can always catch, I'm very humbled to be with one of the best, if not the best, booktuber out there in Taylor as my partner for this interview series, Page Chewing. So check out all of our Page Chewing episodes, because I think you'll find some fabulous long-form content there. All hail long-form content. It's keeping it's keeping us from, I think one of my friends said that our intellect is shrinking, is disappearing. So long-form content will help you. Trust me, if you feel that way. So.
Yes. Oh my God, yes.
Another rabbit hole we can go down.
Oh God, yes.
I notice if I scroll for long enough, I sense a shift. I'm like, wait a minute, it shouldn't be this hard for me to sit down and read. Scary stuff. So obviously, with no ulterior motive, yes, check out long form content like chewing. But if you don't know, my name is Taylor. My YouTube channel is Made Between the Pages. I do a plethora of different content. Sometimes I talk about Japanese life as well. So it'd be lovely to have you over there. But once again, thank you so much, Victor, for being here. This was such a delightful conversation.
This was so much fun. I barely noticed the time, honestly. I could keep talking. This was great. We should do this again.
Consider it done. There's always an open invitation for people that we've had on here. So you guys may be seeing Victor again. But thank you to everyone in the comment section who came by. I say it every time, but it is you guys that make Page Chewing what it is. Even if you're here live or if you drop a comment and watch the replay after, as I know a lot of you do, just thank you for being here. It's that community we're talking about. So I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.